Hi boys and girls, welcome back for a new week. This week is all about ocean and under the sea. And you're probably wondering why I have two bowls here. And today we're going to do an experiment. But before I show you my experiment, I have to ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that when you're taking a bath, sometimes some of your bath toys float and sometimes some of them sink? Have you ever noticed that before? You have? Do you think you know why some items sink and some things float? Okay, yell out those answers. You think it's if they're heavy? Okay, so their weight. If something's light, maybe it will float, and if something's heavy, it will sink. Okay, what else? Maybe their size, right? If something's really, really big, do you think it will sink? Or if something's really, really small, do you think it will float? Well, let's find out. I thought it'd be fun to do a sink and float experiment, and since we're learning about under the sea this week, I thought it would be fun to use real salt water from the ocean. So in my small bowl here, I have regular water that I got from the sink, and in my big bowl here, I'm going to pour real salt water that I collected yesterday from the ocean. And if you look closely, you may see some seaweed floating around in there. And I want to see if salt water makes a difference when items are sinking or floating. So let's pour in my salt water. Okay. So on my left, I have my regular water, and on my right, I have the salt water. And I have a bunch of objects here on my plate that we're gonna use today to see if they float or sink in water. And maybe they'll float in regular water, but maybe they'll sink in salt water. Do you think the type of water will make a difference if something floats or sinks? Let's find out. So the first object we have is yell it out, what is this? A water bottle, that's right. And is my water bottle empty or full? It is empty. Do you think a water bottle will sink or float in water? Okay, yell it out. All right, let's see. First, I'm going to put it in the regular water. Did it sink or float? That's right, it was floating. How about the salt water? Let's see what happens. Did it sink or float? It's floating, that's right. So when something is floating, you can say that it's buoyant. Can you say that big word with me? Buoyant, good job. Let me get out my towel. We'll put our objects on my towel. Okay. Next, I have what is this? A rock, that's right. And how do you think this rock feels? Do you think it's heavier than the water bottle or lighter? Heavier, you're right, it is heavier. Do you think it will sink or float? Okay, some friends say it will sink. Friends might say it's floating. Okay, let's find out. So first we'll try it in the regular water. Did you hear that clink sound? That means it went to the bottom. Did the rock sink or float? It did sink, that's right. Now how about if we put it in the salt water? Do you think it will do the same? Okay, let's see. Did it sink or float, boys and girls? That's right, it's at the bottom, so it did sink. Okay, so the water bottle was floating, but the rock sunk. Let's try a sponge. Do you think the sponge is heavier or lighter than the rock? It is lighter, you're right. Let's try it in the salt water first. Did it sink or float? It's at the top, so it's floating, that's right. Let me squeeze out that water. And let's try it in the regular water. Did it sink or float? That's right, it's floating. So what's that word for when something is floating? That big word that I just taught you, it's buoyant. Good job. All right, so let's see what's next on my list. Oh, you boys and girls should know what this is. We learned about this last 2 weeks ago. It's a seashell, that's right. And where do we find seashells? At the beach. Now, do you think my seashell is light or heavy? Some friends might think it's heavy, some might say it's light. It's a little light. What is your guess? Do you think it will sink or float in the water? Okay, let's find out. First, we'll put it in the regular water. And if you heard, it made a little sound. It's at the bottom, so it sunk. Let's see what happens when it goes in the salt water. Did you hear the little clink? It's at the bottom. That means it sunk. So far our rock and seashell sunk, and our water bottle and sponge floated. All right, let's see about this. Who knows what this is called? You might find it around your house. Sometimes it closes your bags of snacks. A clothespin. Okay. Do you think it's heavy or light? It is very light. What's your guess? Do you think it will sink or float in the water? Okay, some friends say it floats and some say it will sink. Let's see. Did it sink or float? It's floating in the regular water, so it's buoyant. Let's try the salt water. I wonder if it will sink in salt water or float. Did it sink or float, boys and girls? It's floating, that's right. So our clothespin floats, it's buoyant. We might all have this in the house, right? Everyone knows what this is. It's a fork, that's right. And do you think this fork is metal or plastic? This fork is metal, that's right. So, it's heavier or lighter than a plastic fork? What do you think? It is heavier than a plastic fork. Do you think it will sink or float? Let's find out. It clanked at the bottom, so it sunk. Let's try the salt water. Do you see it? It might be a little hard to see, but it is at the bottom. Let me see if I could show you it this way. Now, can you see it? It's at the bottom, that's right. So the fork, the rock, and the seashell, they all sunk. We have 2 more objects left. Who knows what this is? It's a starfish, that's right. And where do starfish live? Who can tell me? In the ocean, that's right. Now, is this a real starfish or a pretend starfish? It's a pretend one, that's right. Do you think it will sink or float? Okay, let's find out. Is it at the top? No, it's sunk. But you know what? It's so small and it's so light. I thought that it was going to float. Do you think it will float or sink in the salt water? What's your guess? Okay, let's see. It's all the way at the bottom, so it sunk, which is so surprising to me because it's very light and it's so small. I thought it would maybe float. My guess was wrong. All right, let's see about my last object, which is an apple. That's right. And what color is my apple? It's yellow. Now, do you think the apple is heavy or light? It is heavy, that's right. It's heavier than the starfish, and it's heavier than the sponge, and it's heavier than the water bottle. Do you think it will sink or float? All right, let's find out. Let's do salt water first. It's floating. What? Did that surprise you? Did you think it would float? Or did you think it would sink? Okay, let's try the regular water. And again, let me bring it closer. Did it float or sink? It's floating, that's right. So we can say that the apple is also buoyant. Oh, sorry boys and girls, if you hear that, my neighbors are getting construction done on their house. So now, do you think you know why some items sink and some float? Was it based on their size? Well, remember, the starfish was really small and light, but did the starfish sink or float? It sank, that's right. And the apple, that's much bigger and heavier, did the apple sink or float? That's right, it was floating. So does size matter if something sinks or floats? No, size doesn't matter. How about weight? Weight does matter a lot, that's right, because the apple was heavier. Yes, that's right, so weight does matter. If something's heavy, it sinks. But the real reason that something sinks or floats is its density. And its density is what it's made out of, its stuff inside that makes it heavy. So if something has high density, it will sink. So things that had high density were, I picked up the wrong object. The rock had high density. This seashell had high density, right? The metal fork had high density. And so did my starfish. Even though it's small and light, it had high density. All of the stuff inside made it sink. And things with low density, like the water bottle, the clothespin, the sponge, and the apple, they float or they're buoyant, right? That's that big word, buoyant. And salt water makes things dense. So usually that's why when you go in the water with a grown-up, right? You always go in the water with a grown-up, you float. And a lot of objects float because the salt water makes things more dense. So I hope you enjoyed our science experiment. And if you want to, you can do this at home. If you can't get to a beach and collect salt water, that's okay. You can make your salt water at home. All you need is water and regular salt. Mix it up and you'll have salt water. And then you can get a regular bowl and put regular water from the sink. And you can do your own experiment at home with your family using different objects you find around your house. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon with another Under the Sea Ocean video. Enjoy your day.